Imagine sitting on a plane, minding your business, and within seconds your life changes forever. That's what happened to her. 5 police officers boarded with guns and orders. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check IDs. They just saw a black woman and made a choice. A violent one. Dragged it from her seat. Cuffed. Shamed. All based on a resemblance to a suspect in a grainy news clip. But they didn't know who she really was or what she was doing there. They didn't know they had just jeopardized a national security mission, or that they were about to face the biggest mistake of their careers. Stay with us to hear the full story, because this one deserves to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And tell us, where are you watching from today? Let's see how far the truth can travel. The steady roar of jet engines outside the Airbus A341's windows was deafening, but inside the economy cabin, things were relatively quiet. Passengers were settling in for the morning flight from Atlanta to Miami. Soft chatter, the clatter of bins, and the sound of safety announcements filled the air. In seat 13 and near the window, FBI agent Alara Knox tried to blend in. She wore dark jeans, a white shirt, and a simple vest, smart but unobtrusive. Her hair was tied back in a bun, her face bare of makeup, with thin-rimmed glasses partially hiding her alert, intelligent eyes. On the surface, she looked like any other traveler, maybe a little tired, maybe focused on work, but inside, her mind was racing. This was no ordinary flight. It was the pivotal phase of Operation Golden Eagle, a nearly 2-year, top-secret mission to dismantle a terrorist financing network funneling money into the U.S. through advanced laundering channels. A few rows away sat the package, the codename for Nader Aljam, a key figure in the operation. He had information on planned attacks and the identities of high-level collaborators. Ilara's task remained low-profile: monitor Aljam through the flight and ensure he reached Miami, where another FBI team would intercept him. Any mistake, any disruption, could jeopardize the entire mission. She took a breath and pretended to read an article on her tablet, which had a privacy screen. In truth, she was watching everything, using reflections and her peripheral vision to keep tabs on her target. Aljam sat quietly reading. Good. She needed it to stay that way. But peace was about to be shattered, and not by the man she was watching. In row 10, Marjorie Kessler, a white woman in her late 60s, was scrolling her phone. She'd just come back from visiting her daughter and was flying home to Florida. A news story caught her eye: a bank robbery in Georgia a few days ago. The suspect? A black woman. The report had a blurry sketch and low-quality video. Kessler casually looked around the cabin. Then her eyes landed on Alara Knox in row 13. Something about her seemed coarse. The image on the news was blurry, but the figure, the black hair tied in a bun, and most importantly, the skin color, reminded her of that dangerous female criminal. At first, Mrs. Kessler had some doubts. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But then, her deep-seated fears about crime, her personal safety, and unconscious biases about black people started to rise. She looked at Alara a few more times, trying to detect suspicious signs. Alara, sitting quietly and focused on her tablet, not talking to anyone, suddenly seemed cold, mysterious, and suspicious in Mrs. Kessler's eyes. It can't be a coincidence, she told herself. It looks too much like her. What if it really is her? What if she has a weapon? What will happen on this flight? Panic began to take over. She told herself it was her civic duty to report it. Better to be wrong than to miss something, she thought, justifying her fear and prejudice. Mrs. Kessler looked around for a flight attendant. When a young stewardess passed by, she quickly raised her hand in a discreet but urgent gesture. The attendant stopped, smiling professionally. "May I help you?" "Chap," Mrs. Kessler whispered, motioning for her to lean closer. Then, with a voice trembling with anxiety and excitement, she said, "That girl in seat 13A, I think she's the woman on TV. The bank robbery in Georgia. She looks exactly like her. Very dangerous." She may have unintentionally exaggerated the resemblance or added suspicious details about Ilara's behavior. The stewardess, though taken aback, remained professional. She reassured Mrs. Kessler, asked her to remain calm, and walked briskly toward the front to report the concern to the chief flight attendant and the captain. Following protocol, The information, though vague and based on personal bias, was passed from the cockpit to ground security at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport. And like a snowball rolling downhill, this one comment set off a chain of events no one could have imagined. Back in her seat, Ilara was still focused on monitoring the Aljam target. She noticed the aircraft slowing down on an alternate runway even though it wasn't time for takeoff. A small change, but enough to trigger her instincts. She looked out the window, then discreetly studied the crew. Something was wrong. Minutes later, the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Dear passengers, due to an urgent security reason, we are forced to temporarily suspend departure. Please remain seated and follow the crew's instructions. We'll update you as soon as possible." The cabin buzzed. Nervous whispers filled the air. Ilara's pulse quickened. A security emergency? Was Aljam exposed? Or was it something else? She stayed composed, eyes on her tablet, but her mind raced through possible scenarios. Then the plane's door, which had already been sealed for departure, swung open again. Noises from outside crept in, and then they appeared. 5 Atlanta Police Department officers boarded, looking tense and uneasy. Leading them was a white man in his 50s, wearing the rank of sergeant. His name tag read Sergeant Stroud. His expression was stern, but there was impatience, even aggression in his eyes. 4 younger officers followed closely behind, hands on holsters or batons. Their presence instantly changed the atmosphere. Fear rippled through the cabin. They barely acknowledged the chief steward at the door. Stroud gave a quick nod. "Where's the subject?" he asked curtly. The young flight attendant, visibly shaken, pointed toward the back of the plane. "In seat 13, sir?" Stroud and his men turned their eyes toward Ilara Knox and marched down the aisle. Their boots thudded heavily on the floor. Passengers pulled away nervously. Ilara's heart dropped. This had to be a mistake, but their posture, their pace, it was too aggressive, too certain. She knew one wrong move could end everything. She would have to stay calm. Anything that looked like resistance might not just escalate the situation, it could also expose her identity. As the police stopped right next to her row, Sergeant Stroud stared at her with a harsh, judgmental gaze. He didn't ask for her name or identification, nor did he explain why they were there. Instead, he barked, full of arrogance and authority, "You there? Stand up right now. Put your hands above your head." Stroud's shout echoed throughout the cabin, sending a wave of panic among passengers. Ilara was momentarily stunned by the sudden aggression and absurdity. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Officer, what's going on?" "I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" Stroud sneered. "Don't play dumb with me. We know who you are. Someone on this flight recognized you from the wanted poster," he declared loudly, as if sentencing her before everyone. Wanted poster. Ilara's confusion deepened, anger rising inside her. There must be some serious mistake. "I'm not the person you're looking for. I can show you my ID to verify." "Shut up," Stroud snapped. His face showed clear impatience. "What tricks can a cunning criminal like you try that we haven't seen? Get up at once, or we'll have to use force." Ilara realized the situation was spinning out of control. Arguing wouldn't help, but complying without question could risk the entire mission. She stayed seated, locking eyes with Stroud. To him, her hesitation was defiance, and defiance from a black woman was unacceptable. Gritting his teeth, he signaled the 2 nearest officers. "She won't cooperate. Pull her out." The 2 young officers sprang into action. Without warning, they grabbed Ilara by the arms and began pulling her from her seat. "Wait," Ilara cried, trying to resist. "What are you doing? You can't do this. This is illegal." Stroud immediately took her resistance as justification. "See? She's resisting," he shouted, almost gleeful. "Restrain her. Handcuff her." Chaos erupted. One officer pinned her shoulders. Another twisted her arms behind her back. Ilara struggled not to attack, but to protect herself and protest the illegal arrest. Her cries of pain, the metallic click of handcuffs, gasps from nearby passengers, it all blurred into a nightmare. And while restraining her, Stroud and his officers didn't hold back their insults filled with racial slurs and dehumanizing language. "You people only know how to cause trouble," one muttered. "Think you're tough now? Let's see how tough you are at the station." Another added, "Think you can run you black? Get her off this plane. Don't let her dirty this place." Her hands were cuffed tightly behind her. Her vest shifted, her hair was messy, her cheeks burned with humiliation. She was dragged down the narrow aisle, past rows of passengers staring, some with fear, some with pity, some with judgment. She glanced quickly at Nader Aljam. He looked at her surprised, maybe disappointed. That one glance stabbed Ilara in the heart. The mission had failed. 2 years of preparation, surveillance, and planning gone, ruined in minutes by ignorance, prejudice, and abuse of power. She was pushed off the plane and through the boarding tunnel in a daze. Her wrists throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache inside, the sense of injustice, rage, and failure. She didn't even know how it had escalated so badly, so quickly. Ilara was taken to a more secluded holding area near the gate, away from public view. 5 officers surrounded her, and Stroud stood across from her, arms crossed, smug and hostile. "There's no denying it now," he said with fake confidence. "We'll take you to the station, verify your ID, and for resisting and being wanted, prepare to go to jail." He chuckled, clearly enjoying himself. But Ilara was no longer in shock. Her FBI training kicked in. Yes, the mission had failed, but now she had a new mission: protect classified information and make sure those responsible were held accountable. She looked Stroud dead in the eye. Her voice was cold, sharp, and powerful. "Sergeant," she said calmly, "you and your officers have just made a very, very serious mistake." Stroud frowned, annoyed by how calm she was. "A mistake?" he sneered. "The only mistake was that you were dumb enough to get caught." "No," Ilara replied firmly. "Your mistake was acting on bias and unverified info. Your mistake was ignoring basic ID checks. Your mistake was using force, insulting, and illegally detaining a U.S. citizen." She paused, locking eyes with him. "And your biggest mistake," she said slowly, "was obstructing a federal agent during an active operation." The words hit like a bomb. Stroud and the other officers froze. His smug expression vanished, replaced by confusion. "Agent? Federal?" he stammered, visibly shaken. "What are you talking about?" But his eyes were filled with fear. The other officers looked at one another, pale and uneasy. Something was clearly wrong. Ilara didn't wait. She recited her ID. "Agent 75252. Special Agent Ilara Knox. BI. Counterterrorism Unit." She stared directly at Stroud. "You just interfered with a national security operation. Do you understand what you've done?" Silence. Total terror filled the room. FBI. National security. The words crushed them. Stroud went pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His legs shook. One officer leaned against the wall. Another trembled uncontrollably. They looked at Ilara like they'd seen a ghost. The disaster was clear. Just then, 5 people in plainclothes but moving like trained professionals approached from the waiting area. The man leading them, in his 50s, with gray hair and a black suit, walked straight to Stroud. His eyes were cold as ice. "Sergeant Stroud, Atlanta PD," he said. "I'm Preston Vance, Assistant Director, FBI Atlanta Field Office." He showed his badge. "Special Agent Ilara Knox is working under my direct command. Why is she in handcuffs?" Stroud stammered, trying to explain. But Vance wasn't interested. "Agents," he ordered, "disarm these officers. Confiscate badges and radios. They're being held for obstructing federal duty and violating civil rights." The FBI agents moved fast. In seconds, the 5 officers were disarmed, their authority stripped. Just minutes earlier, they had acted with arrogance. Now, they stood powerless, surrounded and silent. One female FBI agent quickly approached Ilara, unlocking the cuffs. "Are you okay, Ilara?" she asked gently. Ilara rubbed her sore wrists and nodded. "I'm fine. But the mission, it failed." Her voice was low and full of disappointment. "We know," Vance said, stepping closer. "Our priority now is keeping you safe and dealing with this. We'll talk about the mission later." He gave a cold look to the 5 officers now detained. "Take them to the office. The storm's just begun." The airport incident quickly escalated into a national crisis. News that 5 Atlanta police officers had wrongfully arrested an FBI agent during a top-secret counterterrorism mission shocked not only the FBI and APT, but also the Department of Justice and Atlanta's city government. Ilera was taken to FBI headquarters in Atlanta. After a medical exam confirmed only minor bruises, she gave a detailed and emotional debrief. She described the officer's behavior, the lack of protocol, and how Nader Alj had witnessed the arrest, meaning her cover was blown and the mission was ruined. The impact on Operation Golden Eagle was devastating. Meanwhile, Sergeant Stroud and officers Riley, Chen, Miller, and Davis were held for separate questioning. Under pressure, they quickly admitted to acting on an unverified report and not confirming Ilera's identity. Stroud blamed stress and instinct, but the bodycam footage captured his discriminatory language and excessive force. His subordinates claimed they followed orders but admitted they sensed something was wrong. A joint investigation by the FBI, DOJ Civil Rights Division, and Internal Affairs was launched immediately. Testimonies came from Ilera, the agents who intervened, the flight crew, and passengers including Marjorie Kessler, now remorseful and frightened. But the most damning evidence came from the officers' body cameras, showing clear abuse of power, racial bias, and a drastic shift in behavior after learning Ilera's identity. Though the case was partly kept confidential for national security, some details leaked. The Atlanta Police Department had no choice but to act. Within a week, all 5 officers were suspended without pay. After the investigation concluded, they were officially fired for serious violations, abuse of power, racism, unlawful arrest, and compromising national security. But that wasn't the end. The DOJ reviewed the case and filed a federal indictment, charging the 5 former officers Roderick Stroud, Michael Riley, David Chen, Samuel Miller, and Anthony Davis with multiple criminal offenses. The primary charges were deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S. Code SS 242, targeting public officials who abuse power to deny a person their constitutional rights. Obstruction of justice, specifically obstructing a federal agent in the line of duty. The trial of the 5 former Atlanta police officers in the U.S. District Court in Georgia gained national attention. Though the details of Ilera Knox's mission remain classified, the case sparked deep public debate about racial discrimination, police accountability, and the divide between local and federal authority. In court, the 5 defendants appeared tired and regretful, far from the authoritative figures they once were. Prosecutors laid out a strong case, focused on the injustice Ilera suffered and the damage caused to a critical national security mission. The officers' bodycam footage became damning evidence, showing clear abuse of power. Special Agent Ilera Knox testified professionally, describing events objectively. Her calm, detailed account carried weight, especially as a federal agent. The defense argued the officers made a mistake under stress, blaming the initial false report from Marjorie Kessler. They pleaded for sympathy, highlighting lost careers and families. But the video and Ilera's credibility made their case weak. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges. Weeks later, the sentencing hearing followed. The judge condemned their actions, emphasizing that racial bias and abuse of power are unacceptable, especially from those sworn to uphold the law. He pointed out that none of the 5 officers had intervened, which reflected a deeper cultural problem. Sentences were as follows. Roderick Stroud, the leader, 4 years in federal prison. Riley, Chen, Miller, and Davis 3 years each. These sentences sent a strong message: following unlawful orders doesn't absolve responsibility. As they were led away, the 5 men broke down in tears filled with despair and regret. Justice had spoken. While it couldn't undo what happened to Ilera or save Operation Golden Eagle, it made accountability clear. Months later, Ilera stood at the FBI firing range in Quantico. Her form was sharp and precise. Outwardly, she remained the focused, professional agent she had always been. But between shots, the memory of the arrest at the airport came back. She didn't feel triumph about the officer's sentences, only a complex mix of sadness, frustration, and renewed determination. She reflected on how the real danger sometimes isn't criminals or terrorists, but prejudice and abuse of power from within. She also thought about Marjorie Kessler, not a bad person, just one driven by fear and bias, who acted on misinformation with terrible consequences. This reminded Ilera that fighting injustice isn't only about changing systems, it's about changing minds. The experience left a scar, but also gave her mission new meaning. Not just protecting the country from threats, but fighting for equality and human dignity so no one has to suffer what she did. just because of the color of their skin. She reloaded her weapon and faced the next target. The fight continues and she's ready. As she holstered her weapon and stepped away from the range, the quiet afternoon air at Quantico carried a strange weight, not of burden, but of purpose. Each step Alara took felt heavier with responsibility but lighter with clarity. She wasn't just an agent trained to follow orders, she was a woman who had faced a system that nearly crushed her and stood back up. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every person who had been silenced, doubted, or profiled for daring to exist in spaces where they weren't expected to be. In a briefing room later that day, Alara met with a group of new recruits. Young, eager faces looked at her not just with admiration, but with hunger, a hunger to understand what justice really means beyond procedures and codes. She didn't talk about the medals on her record or the missions that went right. She told them the story of what went wrong and how silence, inaction, and assumptions nearly destroyed a life. And when she finished, the room didn't erupt in applause. It fell into deep silence, the kind that means people are thinking, re-examining, learning. That, to Alara, was a win far greater than any conviction. Because laws could change, policies could evolve. But real change, lasting, human change, always started with a story told truthfully and heard completely. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees. The light was softer now, but it still reached her. And she knew in this ongoing battle between fear and understanding, between prejudice and principle, she was right where she needed to be. Still fighting, still believing, and still unshaken. Months passed, but the ripple effect of that day in Atlanta did not fade. Across precincts and training academies nationwide, the footage from the body cams once kept under wraps was now being used in internal reform workshops. Not as scandal, but as a warning. A reminder of what happens when judgment replaces justice. When uniforms give men a false sense of superiority rather than a duty to serve with humility. At the Department of Justice, a new policy review was underway. Alara's case had become the catalyst for a federal reassessment of interagency protocols, how local law enforcement interacts with federal operations, how civilian reports are handled, and how racial bias is addressed not in theory, but in real life. High-pressure situations. But for Alara, the consequences weren't just professional. Quiet moments haunted her, the click of the cuffs, the heat of humiliation, the helplessness in the eyes of passengers who watched and said nothing. Healing was not linear. Some nights were heavier than others. Yet what pushed her forward was the knowledge that her pain had purpose. Survivors of profiling reached out quietly, often anonymously, thanking her for not staying silent. Parents wrote to say they had shown their teenage children her story. Young agents of color told her they now walked into training rooms with their heads held a little higher. And then, one morning, as Alara walked through the lobby of FBI headquarters, a young woman stopped her. Nervous eyes bright, voice low. "Agent Knox, I just wanted to say thank you. I joined because of you." Alara smiled, not the practiced, guarded smile of an agent, a real one. Soft, human. The kind that says, "I've been through it. And I'm still here." Because at the end of the day, justice is not a single verdict. It's a direction. And every step toward it, no matter how painful, how public, or how slow, still counts. Note, this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.